Months ago, with the CDC publishing a new framework to return to sailing, it seemed like a no-brainer that cruises, while already suspended for months, would definitely be back for 2021. In the past several weeks, however, there have been more questions about that thinking. So, will cruises set sail again this year, or will they continue to be stuck at the dock? First, cruise lines, they've continued to push back return dates. First, it was for the end of 2020, then through March 2021, and now all the major lines have pushed the return date until at least May. Then, an investment analyst recently went on record to say that cruises could be paused for all of 2021, and in the best case scenario, the return wouldn't be until July of this year. According to a Barron's article, quote, "The sentiment for 2021 has now changed to, it's possible 2021 will not be a return to revenue sailings in North America, or at least not before the fourth quarter," Truist Securities analyst Patrick Scholes wrote in a note on Friday, close quote. With a slower than expected initial rollout of a potentially groundbreaking vaccine, worries about new variants, combined with still high cases of COVID spread, is it possible that cruises don't start again until after 2021? Here's the latest updates and our opinion. So let's start with where things stand right now. At best, the earliest that major cruise lines will begin sailing based on their own scheduling is in May, but even that still looks iffy. Carnival Corporation, Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings Limited, and Royal Caribbean Group all announced self-imposed suspensions that go through April, and that now seems to be shifting toward through May. And even at that point, plans are for limited cruises when first starting back. But just because cruise lines have a voluntary pause in place doesn't mean that they can simply get back to cruising whenever they feel like it. On top of that pause is the CDC's Framework for Conditional Sailing. This framework replaced a prior no-sail order that stopped cruises from the possibility of sailing. Now, the framework instead lays out a path to return. This path includes several steps and dozens of details, including things like simulated voyages and applying for a conditional sailing certificate from the CDC before the ship can take on paying passengers and return to cruising. One other aspect of the CDC's framework is that the agency will determine the phases of return based on, quote, public health considerations. In other words, if cases go higher, then there's no guarantee that the CDC will allow cruises to sail. In fact, as of now, no cruise line that we've seen has sailed a simulated voyage. Carnival CEO Arnold Donald recently said his company was waiting on further instructions from the CDC. Royal Caribbean has said they expect word any day from the CDC and expressed optimism in getting the process ramped up to get back to sailing soon. In other words, there appears to be a holding pattern right now for the return of sailing. Of course, there are plenty of moving parts when it comes to cruises coming back. Cruise lines have to prepare vessels and go through the CDC framework. The CDC has to give approval to the cruise lines. Foreign ports must sign off on cruise ships visiting, but most importantly, everyone has to feel that cruises can sail safely without passengers falling ill or spreading the virus. So here is what is seen as the biggest factors in a return to sailing. First are the cases in the United States. Of course, no factor is bigger in the return than the number of COVID cases seen. Thankfully, at this time, there is a sharp downturn in the number of cases. From an average daily number of new cases of more than 250,000, the United States has now dipped well below that figure to around 75,000 new cases each day. In fact, new cases are now about where they were when the CDC lifted the no-sail order and replaced it with the framework to return in late October. In other words, we are finally seeing some good news when it comes to the number of cases. More good news, the rollout of a vaccine looks to help speed up the fall in the number of cases, which could get cruising back sooner. Unfortunately, worries about variants may cause another hurdle. No one seems to know just yet, but there is no doubt that things are trending in the right direction. Second is the CDC framework. Another key component to any cruise return is the CDC and their pathway to return to sailing. The basics include several different steps to get back cruising, including creating a safe environment for the crew, completing simulated voyages, and receiving certification from the CDC before sailing again. What that framework doesn't have is a concrete timeline. there are no set dates as to when cruises can return. The return is set by when the CDC is satisfied that cruise lines have met the requirements and can sail safely. Currently, the organization says that, quote, all people avoid travel on cruise ships, including river cruises, worldwide because the risk of COVID-19 on cruise ships is very high, close quote. There are, however, some lead times required, even though there aren't concrete dates. For example, before a cruise line plans to sail a simulated cruise, it must provide 30 days notice to the CDC, and the line must apply for a certificate to sail with passengers at least 60 days before the anticipated return date. These time requirements add several months to any potential return of cruise ships. Finally, there's a new administration. New leadership in the United States is making the pandemic a top priority. Already, travel restrictions are being put in place from some countries to limit the spread of COVID variants, as well as testing for international travelers. Mask wearing is now commonplace among the president and other high-ranking staff. It stands to reason that given the focus on battling this health crisis, cruises may be among the last things to return. After all, the CDC pointed to a study done for the Diamond Princess where the reproduction rate of the virus on board was nearly 15, meaning that for each person infected, they spread it to almost 15 others before the quarantine was put in place. And in a handful of cruises that have returned in Europe, there have been cases found despite the new protocols. So will cruises return in 2021? At this point, there is no way to know exactly when cruises will return, but there are reasons to be optimistic. Cruise lines continue to sound hopeful, but make it clear that they are working to get back to cruising safely when the time is right. For instance, Michael Bailey, the CEO of Royal Caribbean International, said in a recent investor update that, quote, my sense is that we're getting closer and closer to good news. The best we can do right now, however, is offer an opinion based on what's being seen. Above all, the path of the virus will dictate when ships head back to sea. First, at this time, new cases are dropping sharply. More importantly is that a vaccine, while having a rocky rollout, is getting distributed. Right now, more than 1.5 million doses per day are being given in the US alone, and that number is climbing. Within months, it could be that hundreds of millions of people are vaccinated, reducing the impact of the virus. Of course, being able to finally knock down COVID to manageable levels could drastically transform our daily lives for the better. That could mean getting back to normal, including sailing again. The next several months will give us all a much better idea of what to expect for the rest of the year. Cruises are already paused for most lines through April, and it is looking like further extensions through May. With the 90 days required by the CDC framework, that's 30 days before a simulated voyage and 60 days before sailing when applying for a certificate, it looks likely to us there could be another push in return dates unless simulated voyages are approved soon. Even so, we see reasons to be optimistic cruises will sail again this year, but it largely depends on the rollout and effectiveness of the vaccine. COVID has shown that it won't just go away on its own, and it can spread on cruise ships. But given the potentially hundreds of millions of Americans are set to be vaccinated in the months ahead, there's the potential for a complete change in the current situation. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that we can approach a degree of normality as we get into the fall of 2021. At this point, there is optimism that a return to cruising will happen in 2021, but it seems more likely not to happen until at least the second half of the year. Our personal opinion is that cruises don't sail again until a vaccine is widely and easily available, and that's assuming cases continue to be at lower levels. Let's just hope the vaccine works and the virus doesn't have any more curveballs to throw us.